Hi everyone, as I've got both of these machines in my workshop at the moment, I thought it'd be quite useful for people potentially looking at buying one of these machines or changing to one. Just some of the finer details of the machines, not the things you'll find in the spec sheets, but some of the lower level detail that you'll only really find after living with the machine for a little while. Now I've had this one for more than 15 years. It's a nice machine to use. I haven't yet cut any metal on the X3. When I get time, I will do that, but I've got a fair few observations that, come before you've even done that. So let's dive in. So my major gripe with this machine, the thing that really I find annoying, is the head angle setting, tramming adjustment. You've got a central bolt and a lock bolt in the middle. They're very hard to get to because they're sort of up there. I mean, this bottom one's not too bad, but the one above it is a bit of a pain. It's very difficult to tighten those up without twisting the head, so you have to pre-angle the head and then tighten it up to try and get your tram right, which is a bit of a pain. The X3 has got a nut here and a nut here, either side of the head, and even just the general adjustment of getting it straight, because I had to assemble this thing from parts, is so much easier. And I can imagine that setting the tram should be a lot more predictable. It's also just generally a better kind of design from if you crash this, it's going to twist. I mean, you cannot get those bolts tight enough to prevent it. The pivot point is in the middle, whereas these you've got one either side. So I think that clamping mechanism is far superior. Got a much larger area as well. That circle that it clamps is much larger than the smaller rectangular area that this head clamps to. Nice point on the X3 is the fact that the height adjustment handle's down here on the front, which is very convenient to get to. Now on this mill it's up on top of the column, which where mine's mounted it's sort of fairly low. That's not too bad. What I like about this is that the increments, one rotation gives me 4mm of movement in the head, whereas this one rotation is a millimetre. It's 100th of a millimetre per div. There you are. Which means that you have to crank that handle an awful lot to get this head to move. It takes an absolute age to move the head up and down, whereas this one, yes, it's a bit harder work in terms of force required to turn the handle, because you've got less mechanical advantage, but you can get the head up and down pretty rapidly. And if you're changing between, say, collet chucks and drill chucks or something like that for an operation, being able to move that head up and down quickly is a definite plus. I don't know how much of an issue this is, but the dovetails in this, where they're cut, this just looks incredibly weak to me, and possibly a source of weakness, leading to vibration maybe. This one is very much the other way up. So you've got the base is a more solid looking piece, and then you've got the dovetail returning on the carriage there. This one also has taper gibs and 2 locks on each one. Whereas the X3 only has regular screw adjust gibs and a single lock. Now, single lock's bad because it means that when you lock up the way, it's got a pivot point rather than 2. So this is sort of like the opposite of the head. This head's better. The ways are worse here. Looks like it's a taper gib on the head there, but then that's possibly the least important one, I'd say. Speed. when you turn this mill on, it goes to the speed you've set on the knob, which is very nice. And in fact, it goes in the direction you've set. My mill is by no means standard anymore, but it still pretty much works the same way as it did. This one, when you start it, it starts at 100 RPM, and you have to crank it up every single time, and you have to change the direction every single time. That I think would annoy me. May not be an issue. I suppose you could say it's a bit of a safety thing. It's not going to spin up to full speed straight away, but I think I would find that annoying, having to wind it back up every time I stop the spindle. In fact, I think because I'd have to do that, I probably wouldn't stop the spindle maybe as much as I should, because I'm lazy. So I don't like the interface on this, but I do like the tapping feature. That allows you to change the direction of the spindle just by pressing the button, only at low speeds, but seems like quite a nice feature. So the table on the VM25 is larger, it's 180 millimeters, whereas the table on the X3 is only slightly smaller at 160. Just looks a lot smaller. I think it may be because the base itself is actually larger, so it's just the scale of the two things. You've got a bigger base and a smaller table, and a smaller base and a bigger table. It makes the table look a lot bigger on this one. That's probably just a psychological thing. They still perform the same function. They've got pretty much the same amount of travel depending on which one you buy. Yeah, probably just a preference thing, but the X3 table has always looked small to me. The handles on the X3 are not as nice, don't sound as nice as the I don't know, they just feel nicer. Probably personal preference, but I prefer the feel of that. The X3 feels cheaper. Another negative point for this one is the quill lock. This is a single point lock which just presses on the side of the quill in there, which means that you get a fair bit of quill deflection when you tighten the lock up, which also means that there must be quite a lot of play in the sleeve that the quill runs in. I mean, one day I'm going to probably overhaul the head. It needs doing because it leaks oil out the gearbox, which, I mean, maybe I'll just replace the belt drive for a quieter machine. The X3 is fully belt driven. The X3 looks more like a pinch. It's hard to tell actually because I haven't been inside here yet, but this feels more like a pinch because it's going down the side, so I'd imagine it's pinching the casting around the spindle, which is going to result in less deflection. Neither of the machines have a spindle lock, so I did a video where I made a pin spanner so I can hold the spindle steady while I loosen the drawbar. Finally, the one thing that I find quite limiting with this one is the quill travel. This has only got 50 millimeters of quill travel. The X3 has over 70 millimeters of quill travel, which, you know, doesn't sound like a lot, extra 20 millimeters, but when you're drilling holes and so on, 50 can be quite limiting. Alright, so there's my observations from living with this one for 15 plus years and having this one in the workshop for a few months and just getting to know it by rebuilding it. There's tons of specs which obviously haven't talked about, but they're, you know, paper specs that can be compared more easily. I hope the things that I've pointed out are useful to somebody, and if you've got any further questions, just ask them in the comments. Thanks for watching.